You're all customs and check your heavy luggage, okay? Take this and read it. It'll give you lots of useful information about England.
Whether it was the documentary Has Britain a Color Bar or the teleplay Man from the Sun, during this time, despite the well-meaning narratives, they were both incredibly patronizing once again, but also very dystopic. As you notice when you see the actors portraying the West Indians coming into the country, there's confusion, bewilderment. Where do I go? What do I do? My husband's not here. And it kind of sent a message to many folks who had a chance to watch this that were not in England yet. Oh my goodness, is that how it's going to be for me? You know? And of course, very difficult to do that without TVs. But nevertheless, it sent the message also to Britons themselves that this could indeed be a problem. But ultimately, the man in the story, the central character, rises above it all and finds his own place, and he gets a job and decides to settle down despite the cold and clammy circumstances. He also goes through a couple of incidents of really, really blatant racism, including a fight with the fellow that I talk about in the book as well. And the foreman tells him, you have to come to expect this in England. Excuse me. Now, chapter 3. In chapter 3, what started to happen, it started to be kind of like talking back, so to speak. Again, voices of contention. Urban unrest was looked at not just from this perspective of the mass audience, but also from those folks who may have niche audiences, the subaltern. They started looking at sorts of issues and wondering what was going on with the two. And TV programs came out as a result of that, like Rainbow City and Empire Road, which of course is mentioned in my title. Rainbow City featured a black barrister who had a white wife and was very successful, had parents who were very accepting of him and the wife. But occasionally there would be the comment made within the story about him being black and him being concerned about the white parents not really accepting him and things like that. But it also took on a kind of perspective that if this fellow is indeed going to be polished, prim and proper, then he's much more acceptable as a Briton than someone coming over from the West Indies, kind of hard and rough and speaking in patois. I remember speaking with Stephen Bourne, who's a historian who does some really brilliant work, and I interviewed him for a paper I did about Rainbow City and about sexual miscegenation, the idea of black men and white women mixing together. And audiences didn't seem to have a real issue with Rainbow City, with this black barrister and his white wife, yet there were the sorts of teleplays that made this an issue, as you saw with People in Trouble, the docudrama, I should say. And he was saying that, in his opinion, a black male with a white female is not as threatening as a black couple, because a black couple represents the spawning of more black children, and then more black children, and more black children. At least if he has a white wife, it kind of like makes the child kind of white, kind of black, and things like that. And he said it in a much more eloquent way. I'm just kind of was paraphrasing here. But it's one of the main things about Rainbow City that audiences did indeed accept, but later critiqued as well, because they said the show didn't talk enough about the racial differences and problems. Empire Road, very legendary in that it was the first nighttime soap opera written about black people and by a black writer, Michael Appenzetz. And Empire Road itself was in many ways a dramedy. There was comedy there, okay, but also a lot of dramatic portions as well, and no laugh track whatsoever. So you had the opportunity to view the actual circumstances in the way you chose to. And it also was very much about class differences, because the main character, played by Normanby, very well-known British actor, you recognize him in a minute. He was well-to-do, come from the West Indies, I think from Grenada, I believe, no, from Ghana. No, he's from the West Indies someplace. But he came over some years before and worked his way up and bought himself a store and a couple of apartment buildings, 3 or 4 of them and such. He was doing quite well. And had a brother-in-law who was not very bright, who represented a kind of lower caste sort of West Indian. And you'll see their interaction in just a couple of moments. I've got some clips from both shows. This is John Eliot. He wrote A Man from the Sun.
At that time, it was really the birth of West Indian contribution to English culture. There was a feeling at that time that West Indians should be given a chance considered and treated, imagined, as being people, in the same way that women were fighting to become considered as people. People whose possibilities and whose talents were much greater than they were allowed to
show, he says. Now, when speaking of people, consider now this snippet from Empire Road. This is from the first episode in which Norman Beaton and his wife and his son have come back from vacation to find that the brother-in-law has let things slip into disarray. Another very important thing, too, about Empire Road, within the show, his son, who you'll see in just a few moments, was having a romance with an Indian girl whose father didn't approve. And I really love the fact that the interracial trope was taken away from the binary construct of white and black, instead of being black and brown, which is very interesting. He's the brother-in-law trying to collect some late rent before his brother comes back.
Good out.
I might as well tell you now I ain't got it.
Don't say that, Miss May.
1551, sir. Well, let's just say go on.
Come about other things.
I'm so soon first.
The rent, Miss May.
Forget it. Try the pigtail soup instead.
The rent? Please.
Yeah. Who you shouting at? Don't shout at me in my own kitchen.
Sorry, but it's due today, your rent.
Next week. I pay you next week.
Today.
You don't understand English. I tell you I can't pay you till next week.
But he's coming back today.
Who that?
The boss is coming back today.
Bennett the landlord. Coming back today.
And if I don't have the rent, kill me.
Rubbish. Married your sister.
Yeah, and he blames me for that as well.
What?
Preparing a big welcome meeting.
What? Yes, well, coming on. Check this.
Hello, Bob.
So, just go and stand there, what?
Oh, but he was only trying to say welcome.
Takes your brother 20 minutes to say what it takes normal people 20 seconds.
Well, who's talking about that?
I don't say it's the because I'm talking about you, Mr. Hyde.
I'm dying for a cup of tea.
So what do you think I'm doing with this teapot?
I don't know. Whatever the call was saying was milking it. So, how is it? Guyana.
Oh, Lord, man, I hope you provide a toilet with your showers.
Avatar.
But it's practicing to be a punk rock. Well, how was it? Guyana?
Well, you wouldn't recognize the place.
That ain't true, water.
Word on what? If a place has changed completely, I'll be glad to rush back to England.
Anyway, Guyana is still my home.
Home? What home? England is the home now, woman. So, Walter, you had any trouble since we've been away?
Well, I had a bit of trouble right there.
Is this man saying Business troubles what? Not back troubles in shop and the houses. Alright. I've only been back 5 minutes and already I'm headed for a nervous breakdown. What about the rents? I hope you got everybody's rent up to date. Well, a well is a thing you just dig in the ground for water. I'm talking about the money, not water. So tell me calmly before, of course, when I went away and left you in charge of 4 houses. You haven't sold them by any chance. I mean, I still own 4 houses. Though. Oh, of course you do. Oh, it's joking. Joking? God, get straight. Okay, I tell you what, I'll go and see for myself. Now? Why not? Give me the keys, some of them might get work. You only just arrived. So, I'm the landlord, and there's my properties at it. I'll just go and say hello. I'll see you later. What about the shop? That can wait till tomorrow.
Won't you water?
In the next scene, among other things, Norman Beaton's character finds that the brother-in-law has rented one flat out to 2 Rastafarians. He walks in on them like dancing to Bob Marley music and smoking spliffs and goes ballistic. Incredibly funny, but at the same time poignant in some way, because it looks at, again, West Indian life from a West Indian perspective. Now, in Chapter 4, I started looking at this kind of self-reflexivity the BBC and others started doing at this time. We talk like maybe the early 80s through the 90s and early 2000s. They started offering programs like Black and White in Color, the Black and White Meeting Show. They started looking at race on television and how it was being portrayed. And many of the programs were quite candid about their own failings, especially the BBC program, Black and White in Color, about their own failings to bring forward certain representations that were more balanced and things like that. And along with that, of course, they talked to lots of researchers, especially academicians, about their own perspectives on the failings of the BBC and others. These are the folks they interviewed along the way as well. And they also had various things to say about the very same circumstance. Of course, Stuart Hall, I was very, very blessed to have a chance to speak with them for about maybe 2 hours on the phone. And we talked about our favorite TV shows on British television, including a great miniseries that not many people in the States saw called Holding On, that ran in 12 parts. That was great. And we talked about this particular guy, who's a friend of mine, who's now in LA, trying to find work there. He was in Holding On and became one of Stuart Hall's favorite characters because he's having a romance with a white woman. And again, the interracial thing was very, very minimal. It was much more about class difference. And Stuart Hall wanted to talk about that, of course, which is featured in Chapter 4. Probably the most powerful black woman in British broadcasting that there ever will be was Jan Oliver, multicultural affairs director for the BBC, worked directly with Mark Thompson, who came along before, Greg Dyke, and who is now back as GM once again. And presenter Brenda Manas also talked with her as well as others. She worked for the BBC on a program called The Clothes Show that looked at fashion. Did it for like 5 or 6 years, and one day was told, hey, we're taking a show off here, you can't work here anymore, and took her job away from her. They put the show back on the air, but didn't rehire Brenda. So needless to say, she had quite a bit to tell me. Each of these folks also had a lot of criticisms, obviously, about the BBC, about British television, and portrayals of race, and things along those lines. Here's some examples.
A lot is made publicly about the negative impact which television has on young children. It may make them more violent, the laxity of sexual morals on TV dramas and films, but very little is said about the impact of television on racism. And those who do speak out against the racist stereotypes which television perpetuates are relegated to the sort of lunatic left-wing fringe of society. Or if black people talk about it, it's because they have a chip on their shoulder, really. And these are the sort of things which must be challenged.
So how sensitive are the broadcasters to black people's experience and perspectives?
The power is in the hands of the white majority. And what is presented tends to reinforce the views or the stereotypes of the white majority in our society. And this operates against the interest of the black community, because the black community haven't got a chance to counteract what is presented by the media.
According to its policy guide for staff, the BBC is opposed to racism, though in terms of professional practice, this is seen as one of the most difficult areas of its journalistic activity. The difficulties it draws attention to are chiefly the legal restraints and the use of words describing skin colour. But from a black viewpoint, there are other problems with news reporting.
Now, excuse me, the last chapter of the book looks at these perspectives under Greg Dyke. As some of you may know, Greg Dyke came along, excuse me, as control of the BBC in about 2000. And the first thing he did was to go into the cafeteria and just sit there for 2 or 3 hours and watch people come and go. And went back and was interviewed in the press as saying the BBC was hideously white. You know? And of course, this was not shocking to people of color, but very shocking to some of his white counterparts who were not quite prepared for him to be so outspoken. He went on from there trying to make some changes, including helping to organize the BBF, the Black British Forum at the BBC, a group of black managers and brown managers around the country that were allowed to meet once a month via what then was kind of a rough form of Skyping with Greg Dyke. Also Peter Salmon, who was called the race champion. He was someone that kind of helped oversee racial changes in the BBC. White guy. His only experience with race before that was that he was a sports reporter, go figure. And also Linda Mitchell was hired, a black woman, as the university head. Well, a lot of great plans were made, a lot of promises were made. As you know, Greg Dyke lost his job some years later after kind of debacle involving BBC's reporting of the Iraq War. And Peter Salmon went back to sports reporting, and Linda Mitchell, after making a series of promises as diversity director that she couldn't fulfill, had a nervous breakdown on the job and left the BBC in 2004. So it didn't turn out too well for all three of those guys. But at this point, excuse me, there's still some hope. There are programs that have come along since then that look at issues of race in ways that are helpful, some not quite so helpful. The program Shoot the Messenger, I'm not sure if you guys have seen this or not, it's also been shown here in the States, just on Masterpiece Theater, I think, ran it maybe 2 nights in a row or something like that. And it's all about this character. The actor's name escapes me. I always mispronounce it too. Let me check my cheat sheet here. David Adeloyu, okay? And very popular in British television. You may have seen his face before. He portrays a guy who becomes a teacher in a kind of rundown area in Manchester to mainly black and brown kids. And the black and brown kids hate him because he's a teacher. And there's all this tension. And eventually he goes mad. And you kind of watch him slowly unfold and just kind of fall apart like some kind of Shakespearean play or something. And he speaks to the camera and breaks the fourth wall, talking to the audience about how angry he is at the kids, and begins to really hate black people. And he says so within the story. And all in all, the story itself, I think, is kind of rather bizarre. But the writer, Sharon Foster, a black woman, received a BAFTA award for the screenplay. And the BAFTA, of course, is the British equivalent of the Oscars, as best up-and-coming new talent. Black folks you talked to in England who saw this show hated it, just hated it. And there was so much criticism about the actual story in the press. And it's kind of funny, when Sharon Foster was talked to about it, she said, oh, I just sold something and made some money. I don't care what the BBC did with it. But a lot of black Britons felt it was very irresponsible to position intelligent blacks as being hated by younger blacks. You know? And that itself created a whole avenue of discussion. Another one was this program, Baby Father. Baby Father ran 2 series, or 2 seasons, I should say, about 4 black men, all friends, each of whom had a child out of wedlock with a mother. One guy's professional, one guy's a street guy, one guy's like kind of a sports guy, one guy's independently wealthy. But each one has their own trials and tribulations. Now this was heralded as something really authentic and very decent, despite the obvious deconstruction of the nuclear family here. But it worked really well for a lot of black Britons who liked the way it was put together. And just when the BBC was rolling along on a high, God bless you, sorry. And just when they were rolling along on a high, the very next season, when it came out, the BBC PR and advertising department put together an advertising campaign that featured billboards all over London and all over parts of England that had the 4 guys in a shower, nude, with their bums kind of showing toward the camera, taking a shower after some kind of sporting event or something, as the new season of Baby Father. Now, besides the obvious sexualization of the black male body, it also turned into the situation where a lot of folks looked at that and immediately became completely aghast by this recollection of slaves in indentured service being brought into England. The first thing they would have done was shower. So here these four black men are standing in the shower, and oh my God, people were ballistic about that. And of course, the PR advertising campaign was developed by two white women who hadn't quite done their homework. Now, this program just recently showed on PBS, just last year, Small Island, came out on the BBC in 2009. Probably one of the best pieces of work I've ever seen, based on a novel by the same name, which received a couple of awards. And it's all about a white family in England taking in black boarders during the war. And this fellow winds up getting involved with the white woman whose husband is away at war, but who's also MIA and soon killed in action. And they get together, and she becomes pregnant, but hides it from everyone. And he comes back after the war. She expects him perhaps to stay with her. He doesn't know she's pregnant, but he doesn't, and leaves her with this child on the way. Meanwhile, a black couple has left Jamaica and moved into the building. And just about the time they get there, she's becoming to a point where she can't really hide anymore and has the baby. Excuse me. And the black woman who's living there with her husband, helping her look after the child, all of a sudden her husband comes back from the war and walks in to see his wife with this interracial child. And you can imagine how hell breaks loose. He was brilliant, really, really well done. So I guess they're trying to get it right after all when it comes to these sorts of programs as we move into the future. And finally, in conclusion, you guys, the very last thing I say in my book is this information which you can read. It just kind of comes back to the idea that a lot of the black Britons I talk to, by watching the very films themselves, they again began to take up some of the very same sorts of racist practices. So, oh yeah. Thank you, Michelle. Great question. Yes. It still goes now, but what happened in 1962, they passed the Commonwealth Immigration Act, which said that, well, before that, if you were part of the colonies, you could come and go as you please. After the Commonwealth Act, it said, well, you can't come here unless you are going to have a child here or have people here already. Okay, you can't just come expecting to live. You have to have connections to England already, otherwise you can't come at all. It would change things radically. Yes.
Darrell, thank you, first of all, very much. This is really fascinating and did a fantastic job in the presentation. I just kind of wondered, I mean, I know your research was focused on the BBC, but did you do any other comparing and contrasting with, again, other, what would you call them, TV companies or that type of thing? Yeah, just to sort of, I mean, are there other ones that are maybe are more, have developed maybe a better picture
Of race and
yeah.
exposition?
Yeah.
In theory, they tried, you know, because again, I talk about ITV. I'll talk about Channel 4 as well. And Channel 4, when it came along in 1982, they were positioning themselves as the kind of other, quote-unquote, kind of network where minority voices could be heard. But they wound up creating shows that were very sensational, you know. I mean, almost a Jerry Springer type of network in many ways. And they featured cop shows and things like that, but the cop shows still featured the blacks as the bad guys. So you have the black pimp and the black dope dealer. I mean, my friend Trevor Etienne, whom I showed you guys a few moments ago, was in a program that was developed by London Weekend Television, LWT, that played on Channel 4, called London's Burning. And it was on the air for, my God, a really long time, really nighttime soap, as a fireman named Tony Sanderson. And he had a white wife on the show. And on the program, they constantly argued all the time. And there was one show in which they were supposed to make up and give each other a big, long kiss in the bedroom, signaling the fact that their relationship was about to improve and they were going to go on and have a child. Well, once they ran the dailies by some audiences, folks didn't like it quite so much, so the producer changed the script so that they would instead continue to argue and he would walk out on it. And they were both so angry about it. Oh, they eliminated the kiss also. And they were both so upset about it, they both resigned from the program. And she came back, the white woman did, Trevor never did, he left the show. Well, he came back, I'm sorry, about a season later. Wrote him back into the script. He leaves his white wife, hooks up with a black woman who runs a beauty salon. He quits the fire brigade to become a shop owner with her. And he sees himself as being completely cuckolded by that particular sort of narrative in the story. Yeah, so that's kind of stuff Channel 4 was doing. So I think they've all taken a shot at it, but no one's really been that successful, I think. At least the BBC, I think, had the right intentions early on.
So, like, how would you frame it? Like, you think if you were going to produce something, like, what type of program do you think would be a true depiction of things?
I think I put together probably an anthology, where each week I feature different writers and directors to tell their own stories of color, you know? And perhaps even have them arc over to overlap with each other, where one week we have this family who then knows this family, the next week it's about that family who knows this family, next week, you know, so forth and so on. So we have talent, not just in front of the camera, behind it as well. And not make it so homogenized that it's all black people, all brown people. I mean, we have white characters too.
Yep.
And again, we have white thugs and black thugs and
Yep.
Asian thugs. It's okay as long as it's balanced.
Yep.
Yeah, no doubt. Other questions and comments, folks? Okay, well, I'm sorry. Oh, no. I was going to say, excuse me, the book came out from Manchester University Press in December of last year, and Palgrave Macmillan, their U.S. partners, releasing the book today, ironically, you know, not coincidentally, I should say, February 14th. So, perfect Valentine's Day gift for your loved ones. All right, so again, thank you so much, you guys. Michelle, thanks for being such an excellent mentor over the years. Without her inspiration, her guidance, you guys, this wouldn't have happened. And thanks for coming, everybody. I mean it. Okay, thank you.